You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to TFM's Local Watering Hole. That's right, we're here at episode 400, the official 400th episode, and I am so excited to have with me Christy Morris.
There's a shark in the watering hole.
Oh, not again. Oh my gosh, we are going to have a blast this week. We are so excited. You know, we already... we had to miss last week, but so we've had an episode already come out this week. We talked about Avatar for $3.99, and this week we are going to talk about the original blockbuster, Jaws, which I think is going to be super fun. Before we get into anything else, though, of course, make sure that you are following us on social media. We'd love to interact with you there at the 602 Club on Twitter and on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. And of course, next week we're doing a drawing for a couple of posters. So hopefully we'll get some people who will review us on Apple Podcasts. And if you review and rate us, we'll read out your reviews on the show and we'll pick a winner. And you could win the Avatar poster from the recent release, as well as Top Gun Maverick, biggest movie of the year so far. And then, of course, you could find us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed and you'll get the show as soon as it drops. We also want to encourage you to go and check us out online at Trek FM or on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Of course, we've also got the listeners-only discussion group you can join called the Babel Conference. And we really encourage you to help out the network by going over to Patreon, and that way you can support the network and make sure that all of these shows keep coming to you each and every week. And so, Christy, you know, in lieu of at the end of the show, we normally give some recommendations, but we thought that this week it would be kind of fun to talk a little bit. You know, we've done this the official 400th episode. We've had a few more than that, of course, because we had some supplementals along the way. But number 400 means it's definitely time to talk a little bit about just 400 episodes. And so, you know, you've been with the show for quite a while now. And so first, I was just wondering, was there any episode or movie that we've talked about that really sticks out in your mind as like, oh man, I just remember that one and that was one of my favorites?
So, I don't know that I remember a favorite, just one favorite. There's a lot of favorites, which is a good thing to say. I remember my first one was Passengers.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And then the first Bond film that I came in on was to talk about my favorite Bond film and my favorite Bond, Sean Connery, in Diamonds Are Forever with you and John Champion. And then subsequently the remaining ones.
Your favorite Bond film.
And you'll never let me live it down.
Oh, man. That's so funny. No, that's, yeah, I do. I was just thinking, you being there on Passengers, I cannot believe that was all the way back in January of 2017.
Yeah. I mean, how many years now? 5?
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah. I mean, it just...
like, it's crazy.
So, what number would that have been? I feel like I've been on like half the episodes then.
Yeah, that episode was episode 113.
So I've been on over 200. Well,
for the most part, yeah, because
not all of them, I guess.
Because I know you. We came on as co-host a little bit after that, and but yeah, I mean, you've been on so many of these episodes, and it's honestly just been, to me, it's been a real blast to have you on the show, and to have a partner in crime in this, and so. yeah, I mean, I'm speechless as the fact that it's been that long, because it doesn't feel like it's been that long. Like, I think that's the best part. It's like, it doesn't feel like we've been doing this for 5 years together, but, yeah, it's crazy.
What's your favorite?
So I've had a lot of great episodes that I've really enjoyed. And I think, so there's an episode all the way back in 2015 that I did with John Mills. It's the first time that John and I got together just to podcast ourselves on the 602 Club. And it was one of our first supplementals. It was supplemental number 2, actually. And we did an episode called He's George Freaking Lucas. And so that was us just talking about Star Wars in general. We kind of touched on a lot of different subjects in the Star Wars saga. Talking about, never being a hater of things, even if we didn't like something, loving the prequels, just all of this stuff. It was crazy. And what was so crazy about that was that episode led us to meeting our friend Nick Anastasio, who worked at that point, was working at ILM, and he wrote an email just to say thank you for the episode. And we ended up becoming friends. And then, him and John and I are great friends. We still talk all the time. And that's also the episode that really led John and I to connecting and becoming really good friends. And obviously, not only did that episode give me an amazing friend and brother in Nick, which, again, love the guy so much. But the same thing with John. So this, honestly, this podcast has given me 2 really incredible friends. And it's, to me, that really stands out because, you don't normally think of a podcast or the internet. We hear all the bad things about the internet, but that really made a difference.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, in fact, later on, we did an episode with me and John and Nick, where he came on to talk about the Clone Wars, which was great too. So, so those, to me, that's, I guess, I could sit here and talk all day about, the way is in which this show that, started all the way back in 2014, in October on the 24th, which, can't believe that, we're about to hit our anniversary, but yeah, it's been an incredible ride, and so I'm just I think, just incredibly thankful for one, people listening and sticking with the show, and all the interaction we had with people over the years. The things that I've been given because of the show, specifically incredible friendships. And being in podcasting, led me to meet you and your husband, as well as a bunch of other people from the Atlanta area, going to Dragon Cons together. I mean, this show and doing this show has led to all that. So, yeah, I mean, pretty amazing. Well,
And I'll piggyback on that too and say, one thing I will attribute to you through letting me be a part of this and then also eventually becoming a co-host, you've actually made me a better listener because...
Okay.
Seriously,
yeah, that's awesome.
Honestly, because I used to be a really bad interrupter because I'd be so excited to make my own point about something. But with podcasting and specifically the way that you structure this show, it's very thoughtful and respectful of everyone's turn to speak and waiting until they're finished. And that really helped me. So I did want to say, that's something that you brought to me as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, I definitely appreciate that. It is, you saying that reminds me that in many ways, I think, even in my own personal life, like podcasting has helped me in that too, by making me think deeply about what somebody's saying, more so than what I want to say next, because that's what active listening is all about. And I think you're absolutely right in the sense that that type of active listening then leads to better conversations, because you're actually interacting with what people are saying instead of just what you want to say. And so I really appreciate that. It means a lot to hear. And I think that's been one of the things that I've just enjoyed, you joining the show and us doing this together for so long. Obviously, you build a rapport with somebody. But I think what I appreciate most about you is you don't see things always the way that I do. And I think that's always made for a more interesting show. And so, yeah, I'm super excited. I have no idea if we'll reach the 400 more. So who knows what the life has in store for us. But, we've got the whole rest of the year planned when we got some great stuff coming up for you. And as I mentioned, Christy, this week we are diving into the original blockbuster, Jaws, the movie that set what the template was for the blockbuster. And of course, neither of us was alive at the time that this movie came out. And so kind of getting into the jaws of Jaws, what was your introduction to this movie?
This is one that feels so, I don't know, I can't pinpoint exactly when my first viewing was, but knowing that I've had many viewings. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know that I was probably too young. It's the story of my life, right? But I remember in particular the scene that always stuck out to me that I remember probably from, I would say I bet my first viewing was like age 10, was when Jaws actually comes up on the boat, actually toward the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Because that death was, particularly brutal. I guess that stuck out in my mind. But it's definitely been many a viewing over time, and I don't remember when my first viewing was. What about you?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting one for me, because it's one of those things that I didn't see this movie until a few years ago. It was one of those movies where it wasn't one that, my parents were, going to let me watch back in the day. And so for me, this is not a movie that I grew up with, but I knew of it. It's one of those movies it's just so popular that you absolutely know about it. What's interesting is that as well for me, I always thought of this as being, a much more of, before seeing it, I always kind of thought this was much more of like a horror type of movie. And so what was fascinating for me was to see this a few years ago and really see that this movie isn't anything like that. There is absolutely a fear element in this movie, but this movie is not about being like a horror movie. Really, this is a movie about people. And, so in a lot of ways, I'm actually kind of glad that I didn't see this movie until, more recently, because I feel like I was able to react to the movie as an adult, and I, appreciated that very much, because I think a lot of what Steven Spielberg is doing in the film is much more adult, and a lot of what really makes this a next level film is that it's not really about the shark.
Right.
And I think that's the most amazing part of the movie. Like, I think everybody thinks of the fact that this is about the shark, but it's really not. And I think that's actually pretty impressive. So,
well, and especially for its time, right? I mean, that's the thing too. It was groundbreaking in a lot of ways, and that was kind of a new thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're 100% right. And in part of that, one of the groundbreaking things that we often think of and is the idea of this being a movie about a shark. And there are a lot of, and it's well documented, if you have the Blu-ray version of the movie or the new 4K edition of the film, there are actually 2 documentaries about the making of and the impact of Jaws. Mm. And one of the things you'll hear over and over is that there were shark problems. And that, the shark itself, because just as you mentioned, they're trying to do something that's never been done before. And Spielberg specifically is trying to do something that's had never really been done before, which is, shooting on the open sea and having, a animatronic shark. And so in many ways, the movie becomes limited in the sense of what they can do with the shark. And so, especially like looking back on that, how do you feel like that works, especially as we watch, the movie today?
So I think it's the same kind of situation we've said before where they did the best with what they had, that you can tell, but not necessarily in a bad way, that they then limit the appearances of the actual shark in like a very visible shot. It's more a lot of seeing just the fin, just seeing a shadow, to try and redirect the attention from noticing how bad the shark actually looks.
Right.
And so I think that was smart. If this is all we have and we have to use it the best we possibly can, how can we kind of disguise it to look better than it is? Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. I think you're right on there. And, what I found is that, and there are many conversations in many films about the idea of how limitations can actually spur creativity in a film, and help a film to be better than if you could just do whatever you wanted. It was really interesting in one of the documentaries, you had Spielberg talking about how, if it was today and he was making this movie, you would have just had a CGI shark and you would have been able to see the shark much earlier. In fact, you would have seen the shark at the beginning of the movie when it, attacks Christy at the very start. And, so there would have been a lot less suspense, because I think part of the limitations of not seeing the shark from the beginning is that it actually creates more suspense, because we barely ever see the shark until about 2/3 of the movie is over. And by that point, because of the suspense that's been built through music, through the way the scenes are shot, through the way in which that kind of creates this paranoia, I think it pays off then, and you're able to forgive the fact that the shark doesn't look amazing, because you're scared of the shark by the time it pops up.
Right.
And because because of the limitations, it's actually made the shark feel more real by the time you actually see this shark. And I think that limitation becomes a genius.
Yes.
And it makes all the difference, because I think if this had just been one of those movies that we see today where, like The Meg or something like that, just to name another movie that has sharks in it. Think of Blake Lively and the movie The Shallows, and, it's about a surfer who, finds herself stranded with this great white circling around, and she's like on this buoy or something, and it's not a bad movie at all. It's actually pretty good. But the shark is not a great CGI shark. And so when you finally see it, it kind of, I don't know, it takes you out a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, I was so struck by, especially rewatching this film, about how the limitations of the shark itself create the need for you to find a way to build tension and paranoia without ever seeing the shark. And then, of course, too, the way that the film is edited, even when the shark is there, makes all the difference, too.
Right. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think you said everything that was on my mind. I'm sitting here nodding unanimously.
Such good podcasting.
Yes, exactly. No one can hear it, but I'm nodding. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It becomes the thing that spurs innovation, that causes them to think of everything that they're doing in a new way and figure out a way to fix the problem of not having the great shark. And it actually makes it so much better, to where it reminds you of the way that people would do things later intentionally that way, to try and get the same effect.
Right.
Of like, well, we clearly realized that it built better tension doing it this way. And this is who started it. So, yeah, I think it's great that you mentioned also the way it was filmed and edited, because I wanted to call out, there's 2 times that I can think of for sure where they did a type of shot I don't recall seeing before, and possibly since, but it was where they did manual zoom on the camera as well as moving the camera physically closer. So, for example, the scene where Roy Scheider is sitting on the beach and tells the guy, "Great hat."
Yeah. Yes.
It zooms in on his face.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So there were some things like that as well that were new and created tension in a different way.
No, I think that's a fantastic observation. And I was thinking of another way in which they kind of, get over the shark problem, but I think they create real tension is utilizing the barrels, and because you don't have to see the shark, but you know that the shark is there. And it's such a perfect way to overcome the limitation of the shark, but at the same time, allow the audience to be reminded that the shark is actually there without having to see it, and it's in the area. And I think, again, all of these things do exactly what you want, because this movie doesn't work if there isn't that sense of paranoia and a foreboding and tension of when is the shark going to pop up. You think of all the scenes where it's edited, where people are swimming and everything, and whether or not the shark is going to be there or not. And it's the music and the way things are shot and just the terror that it creates there. And all of that comes from the way they've been building the entire film, and because you actually haven't really seen the shark. And so it's just like, oh, it isn't going to happen. And
I was going to say too, the filming from underneath people in the water. It's definitely always that fear of the unknown that can scare people more than the actual thing itself. Yep. I think that's a great way to put it. I think that really encapsulates it, the fear of the unknown. And of course, then, this innate fear of like, okay, well, we know what sharks can do if they attack, So you put all that together. It's like, well, I've got the unknown and then kind of what I think is the known, and you put those two together, and it's a very dangerous potion to give the people. So no, I love that. You mentioned something, this idea of like, the way that you had some of those zooms and everything happen. I think there's a real realism to the film as well. Spielberg shooting on Martha's Vineyard to create Amity. He is shooting on the Atlantic. It's like one of the first times that an actual movie placed at sea has been filmed at sea, and not just a large tank.
And I think that those are things to which really add to the visceral nature of this film, because you could feel the salt spray when they're on the boat. You can feel the reality of this town, the ferry coming in and offloading a bunch of people for the 4th of July celebrations, coming to the beach and everything. You're outside all the time, so the lighting is it's all natural. Everything just feels so real, and I think that this really adds to the movie in a way that could never have happened if you didn't film on the ocean and you didn't film in a real place, a place that, the beauty of Martha's Vineyard is nothing's changed there since like the 1800s. Wow. And it feels so, it feels so kind of timeless Americana. And it just gives this place this reality to which it almost feels like it could be anywhere on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah, they did a great job of picking a place that is generic enough to then be able to make that work. And like you said, it feels like it could be any place. But then definitely you would never have gotten the same effect if it was on a set with a tank or using a CGI shark even. I mean, obviously they didn't use a real shark here. People could have actually died if they did that. But filming on location does so much for a movie. And then especially here, you can feel the boat tipping at the end. You're not just seeing it, but it's the way that it's done altogether. You feel like you're in the scene. And I think that it also really comes across as well when they have all of the people that suddenly immediately want to go and chase down the bounty and get the shark brought in. I love that scene that they are showing them all on top of each other, and then someone's even throwing fireworks into the ocean beside
Dynamite.
them. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that could happen. It does. Mm-hmm. It feels real because it is real, right?
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I 100% agree with you. And another thing that I think really helps the film in its realism is the fact that a lot of the extras are just extras from Martha's Vineyard. They're people who live there. Mm-hmm. So they are real people, going about basically their real lives, and in the, people in the background, even some of those fishermen that we see, those are all people who are just from Martha's Vineyard. And I think it adds to this sense that we're in a real place and that this could really happen, of course, until you get to the massive shark, jumping up on a boat and everything. But, other than that, I think there's such a beautiful, real feeling to this movie. And Spielberg should be very much praised, I think, for his choice to film there, make sure he films on location. And, I know Spielberg talks about how this movie, he still has basically flashbacks to this film about just how bad the filming was. And like he'll wake up in the middle of the night and having a dream that he was on the 4th day of shooting. This movie shoots for like over 100 days.
Wow.
So, it cost the crew and it cost Spielberg a lot mentally. I mean, he almost had a breakdown at the end of this film, the same way Lucas did, the end of filming the original Star Wars. And so this movie really took it out of him. And yet, again, I think those choices are what helped create a really special film. And I think it might be some of the things that, help this movie continue to be something people go back to. So, I mentioned earlier that I feel like this movie is actually really about characters. And you end up with these 3 main characters, Brody and Quint and Hooper. And, I think everything kind of revolves around them and who they are. And, first with Brody, Rob Schneider is, somebody where he wasn't their first choice. They had wanted Robert Duvall, and, he wasn't interested in playing the character of Brody. Charlton Heston thought that he would be a good person for this role, but I think Spielberg maybe rightly decided he would bring too much persona to the role. And, I was struck rewatching this film just how good Schneider is at playing the everyman. Like, he's just a guy trying to do the right thing for everybody in the town and for his family. And I love his performance in this film. I love it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it doesn't work, honestly, without him. I think that I'll tell you where I also remember him from, actually, more than this even. I don't think you can make this without him. And I think of this movie first when I think of him. But second, I remember him also from Sequest. So for me, he was already kind of a captain as well from having seen that with my dad. And so I think of him constantly as that like hero, captain, leader figure, the good guy. And that's why I feel like he was made for this role as well. He just brings that across so well. And a performance of a guy who is getting the worst hand and having to figure out how to handle everything, and then blamed for anything that goes wrong. And he's like, I really feel for him, especially in the scene with the woman whose son died, slapping him across the face and telling him it's his fault, because he knew that he should have, and he wanted to, and felt like he had to play ball with whatever the leaders in the town wanted instead, and resisted his better judgment in the first place. And it's like, that is unfortunately the role a lot of leaders get stuck in, is at some point you have to make a call, and sometimes it's not the right call.
I really liked where you're taking that, just him being this kind of weary guy. We know from the film that they used to live in New York, and they had moved from New York because New York had turned into a cesspool of crime. That sounds familiar. And they'd moved here because, they wanted, a slower life, a better life for him and his family, his boys, his wife. I don't think he ever expected to have this situation happen to him at all. And, he's thrust into this place where he has to be making these decisions. And I think you're absolutely right. He knows what the right thing to do is, and yet he lets himself be pushed around a little bit by everybody else, because the decision he has to make is going to be an unpopular one. And that is a very hard place to be when you're going to be the one who has to make the decision that people are going to hate, but it's actually the best thing.
Right.
And in the end, too, like, the movie justifies his original position, which is to close the beaches, because he was right. It was a shark attack, and people were going to die if they were allowed to continue swimming in the ocean and this shark was not caught. And so I love that the movie, does play that out. And I think, he's just fantastic in this role. But I think what makes him actually really, really good is the interactions he has with his family, with his wife and with his boys. It feels so real and so genuine, and I think everything about his performance is something that the more I've seen the movie, the more I respond to, because talking about the realism earlier, there's such a realism to the way Scheider plays this role.
Yes.
It just feels natural. And I also appreciate that, you know, for him as a character, this whole movie too becomes about him overcoming his own fears to do what's best for everyone involved, right? He has to overcome his own fears of being on the water in the first place to hunt down this shark so that it's not attacking anybody else. And so, you know, I just, it's such a fantastic performance.
Yeah, I couldn't have honestly seen a different actor, although I love Robert Duvall and Charlton Heston. I do think that you needed someone that was going to be a little softer and be able to bring exactly what you said, especially I think of the scene with him and his son at the dinner table when he's not noticing that his son is mimicking every move he makes.
Yeah, so great.
And then he finally says, "Give us a kiss." And he says, "Why?" And he says, "Because I really need it." And you just feel in that moment really him playing that softness of a father who genuinely loves and is dedicated to his family and just wants to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And a man who is struggling with the weight of the office he carries, which is the police chief, and keeping this whole town safe. And not only the town, but all the people who are going to be supposedly visiting for the holidays.
Right.
You know? And so, no, I think he's just phenomenal. Well, Quint is played by Robert Shaw, who, you know, was also in a Bond movie. And played that incredible role of the villain in From Russia with Love. Great, you know, train scene with Bond, with that huge fight they had. And what's interesting is they originally wanted Lee Marvin, who people would know from The Dirty Dozen. And I think that they cast the right person here. I think Robert Shaw does such a good job of playing eccentric. And yet then becoming the person that we can understand why he is the way he is when he tells that story about what happened to him, you know, with the USS Indianapolis. I think, I mean, again, he's with Scheider, you know, he really plays this role to the hilt, and it's not over the top or anything. It's just, especially when you learn that that's his story, you really feel the reality of this character, and that he, of course, would be a little bit eccentric, having survived what he did, and then seeing this happen again, you know, these shark attacks happening. And his, you know, hatred of sharks. I mean, it's so good.
Yeah, I feel like that scene is the titular thing of the whole movie for him, obviously, because just having the camera focused on his face and watching him speak, he's able to make you picture the entire event on the Indianapolis in your head and feel like you were there with him. And that's just him talking on camera alone. So the man can definitely do any role justice purely based off of that, in my opinion. And he also gets across just how, too, he can have that goofy side of, you know, I was even joking with my husband, the scene where they're loading up the boat finally, for he and Hooper and Brody are loading up the boat to go out together and actually go after the shark. And he's cussing like a sailor and telling that awful joke to Brody's wife. It just is so typical of what you think of as like a guy who spends way too much time on the fishing boat. And then he can also go to playing that super serious scene where you feel like, my God, the man has been through hell and back. So yeah, he was absolutely the right choice.
No, I heartily agree with you, and I think part of that too is that, you know, that speech that you mentioned, he actually rewrote the speech, which had been rewritten by John Milius from the original script. So he's the third person to make that speech happen, and he rewrites it in a way that he can perform it in an adequate amount of time. And I just think, you know, it's so clear that he understood who this character was and exactly what he needed to do to portray it on screen. And I mean, you know, the fact that he gets to go out in that blaze of glory with the shark there stabbing it in the head, you know, it feels, you know, like such poetry that, you know, he had survived the shark attacks there after the Indianapolis was destroyed. And, you know, to go out with this massive shark, it creates this sense of poetry. Also, interesting thing too, you know, the USS Indianapolis story was something that only had been recently declassified. So a lot of people found out about what had happened to the Indianapolis through this movie.
Oh, wow.
Which is fascinating too. So, because that story is 100% true. That's exactly what happened. So to be able to utilize that to create this character, I think just perfect writing, and then it becomes perfect casting. And so, you know, Richard Dreyfuss was not their first choice for Hooper as well. They had thought about a bunch of different people, John Voight, Kevin Kline, Timothy Bottoms, Jeff Bridges, all people that were considered. And I thought it was really fascinating that it was George Lucas, who suggested Dreyfuss because of, you know, him being an American Graffiti. And he gets the role. And I mean, you know, not to sound like a broken record, but I think what's great about him is the way in which, you know, each one of these guys represents a different part of American life, right? Mm-hmm. You know, Scheider is kind of the everyman. Robert Shaw is kind of like the burly man, you know, the warrior. And then Dreyfuss is kind of like the brain. Mm-hmm. And so you have these different aspects of American malehood. And each one of them is a man. And yet they show the variations on what it means to be a man. There's different things that make up men. And I think Dreyfuss just really nails the role beautifully. And especially since, you know, a lot of the story from the book gets cut out for him because there's like an affair that happens between he and Brody's wife. And things like that. And so a lot of that stuff got cut out. And you know, they pare it down. But to me, I don't ever really feel that with Dreyfuss's performance or what they do with Matt Hooper. I feel like I'm glad they didn't do all that stuff because I feel like we got the best of the character then. And he, you know, was a likable character. Mm-hmm. You know, if he had had an affair with Brody's wife, I really would have been like, I don't like this guy.
Right. Like, then what would ever endear him to Brody? And that's such a big part of this. And yeah, I'm definitely glad that they left that out. I didn't know that piece was part of the original story. But yeah, because I think that the whole reason that they're able to bond in the first place is that Brody is looking for anyone to believe him that this is such a huge threat as it is. And he's kind of out of his element with knowing about sharks in general and their habits and what, you know, species of shark this might be or anything. And so that's why he reaches out to Hooper and, you know, is not expecting the height and type of guy that appears before him as the expert, but respects him immediately because he's like, he knows the knowledge that I need. And then invites him into his home for dinner. And the more that they talk, they realize that they have an understanding and that they have a lot in common, even if they're very different people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the greatness of Dreyfuss's performance there, and I think you're absolutely right in saying how it reinforces Brody in the sense that they're both looking for the truth and then willing to go where the truth takes them. So if the truth of the matter is that, the shark that got caught wasn't the right one, they're willing to ask those questions and then live with the answers and then do what they need to do in light of those answers, and instead of, sweep it under the rug. And I think, I know for Dreyfuss, I think that really fits with his personality, just kind of who he is as a person and everything is. And so, yeah, I think this is, a really, I think the beauty of this film is that it was so well cast that you don't really, and you can't really see anybody else playing these roles and the movie really being the same. And that's a really important thing for any movie, I think, to be able to have. There are times when you can be watching a movie and you're like, oh, I could see anybody doing this role. And with this one, I feel like Spielberg just made excellent choices, especially with these three cast members, as well as the entire cast here, to create a movie that it felt cohesive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dreyfuss, I will add it because I didn't focus enough on it. It was so funny that he was this great being so early in his career. This was only the second major film he had done, and yet he was able to get across so much weight in his performance and really could bounce off of Scheider and Shaw so well. And I think that it also, being such a focus on a few important characters and more about them than the shark, did so much for making it a better story, because it's about how these three stories interweave. And and like you said, it's more about the people than the shark.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saying that the quintessential scene in that is sorry, is those three guys connecting there on the boat, especially as Hooper and Quint compare their scars. And it's such a great scene, and to see how those guys come together in that. And yes, they're very different people, but I think that scene specifically allows them to be able to kind of see each other in a light that they hadn't before, which creates this respect. It's just such it's so well done. So
right, like sorry, I was only one other thing I wanted to add. That's why I love, for example, how initially Quint is really, really giving Hooper a hard time and making him feel like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just a brain that has no actual experience. I've been in the middle of battle, with a shark kind of thing. And then finally, all of Quint's plans are slowly one by one not working out. And he's supposed to be the, one with all this experience. I love that he finally looks at Hooper and he holds up the, what is it, like the stick or whatever, the pole, and he's like, how do these work again? And it's like his begrudging way of saying, okay, my plans didn't work, I guess we could try yours.
Yep. No, I definitely agree with you. So one of the things that you said, Christy, and we were kind of alluding to with the way in which Brody and Hooper connect is in their pursuit of the truth. And I was really struck by the way that this movie kind of plays with the idea of selective facts, or playing loose with the truth, and the idea that you've got the mayor, Mayor Vaughn, who is worried about what this is going to do to the town's bottom line and the businesses and everything if, the shark turns out to be real. And yet the way in which people in power will use selective facts to kind of get what they want. And what was so interesting here is that, if they had just done the right thing from the beginning, then they may have been able to have the beach open by the 4th of July, and people wouldn't have died.
Right.
Other people, Chrissy would have died. That was unavoidable because that's where we get introduced to the idea that the shark is there. But yeah, I was just really struck by that, and because it creates this thing to which, we just see all over our world still happening with people in power playing loose and fast with facts. And I put that in quotations, so that they can get what they want, regardless of the costs to others.
It really is sad because you can understand a little bit, of course, that their main source of revenue for this town is the tourists. And, if that's how they're supposed to make money and suddenly they've got no money, what are they supposed to do for the rest of the year to try and recoup that? However, it's putting that above human life that is the problem. That it's people that are willing to ignore the right thing in order to get personal gain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's where they end up getting themselves in trouble, and then second guessing doing the right thing later on when it's staring them clear in the face when they say, that's not the shark. That's just a big shark that was also in this area. And the mayor is still saying, well, let's not jump to conclusions. It could be the shark. And it's like he still doesn't want to believe that it may be wrong and that he needs to continue closing the beaches and looking further into this. He wants to take the easy way out and protect his bottom line.
Well, and it just goes to show how doing the right thing is almost always the best thing, even PR-wise. Just telling the truth. And, because what ends up happening to Amity could have been much worse in the sense that this could just become known as Shark City and nobody would want to come there. So is the choice to stay open and risk more people dying, or just going ahead and closing and making sure you get the shark and then opening again? I mean, the question about which is better there, it seems like a no-brainer that you should close.
Right.
So that you don't become known as this place that, people go to die.
Or that you find out later hid the truth and everyone finds out that you're a liar. I mean, that's so much worse than just owning up to it in the first place and saying, I don't know whether or not this is going to continue to be a problem, but I'm going to do the right thing, versus I'm going to lie and say everything's fine. Everyone please go get in the water. And then I sent people to their death.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, the answer of, I'm sure it's fine, is not the way to go.
Right.
Because it's not fine. And so, I was really struck by that, and I thought it was really interesting to see the way in which that plays out here in the film, and just sadly to be seeing that still play out across our world all the time. Obviously, this movie is very famous for many reasons, and one of those reasons is the masterful score of John Williams. And in fact, this is the movie which gives us not only John Williams' Jaws, but will lead to him being recommended to George Lucas so he can do Star Wars. And so not only does this movie kick off the blockbuster here for Jaws, but it helps create blockbusters in the future, which is, I think, pretty incredible. And so, I don't know what we could say about the soundtrack of Jaws that hasn't been said before, but it truly is a phenomenal score and one of the best of all time.
And I will piggyback on that the thing I respect the most about how this was done and how he works as a composer is that he understands what is memorable as well as what fits the situation. So it's not forgettable. Like we said, the music from Avatar was, fine, but didn't have like a central theme that you're humming. Whereas this came out in 1975 and we still know those two notes and know exactly where it came from and exactly where it started.
Yep. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And I think one of the things is that not only, and again, this isn't anything new, but the way the music creates the suspense that you need, which is beautiful. But I also think his choice of using pirate adventure-like music for when the guys are on the ship and, good things are happening, creates this sense of epic adventure, which transcends the movie to a whole new level. And even Spielberg said that, and has admitted, for him, he does not believe that this movie would have been half as good without John Williams' touch. And, I how can you argue with Spielberg there?
Yeah, no, you can't. I mean, and I'm so glad you brought that up too, about the different touches that made it more of an adventure here and there, because I recognized that actually on this time around, in particular when Brody is climbing up to the top of the mast as it's sinking to try and do another problem solve. You can tell it's applied in the right places so that you're feeling that at the right moment, and that you have hope in that scene, and that it's not all is lost.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I mean, it's one of those things where, so much has been said about the score of this movie. And in all honesty, so much has been said about this movie in general. But I think, we would be remiss to not touch on the fact that part of the reason this movie is successful is because in what it does, and we were talking about all the limitations, one of the ways that this movie is able to overcome the limitations is because that John Williams' score doesn't make you feel like there are any limitations.
Right.
It actually creates exactly what you need. And so I think that's really fantastic. I don't know if you got a chance to see just kind of what they did with the restoration process of this to put it in 4K, but I was really stunned by the painstaking work that they put into preserving this movie, not only on film, but to create the 4K presentation, which is breathtaking in the way in which they worked to make this movie look better than it even had. And I think I got to give it to Universal for the way in which they worked very diligently to make sure that Jaws was preserved for years to come, but that, by putting it out in this format, honestly, even Spielberg himself has said this movie didn't even look this good when it was out in the theater, in 1975.
Well, and I mean, I think, obviously, I don't think you can watch it in 4K without a 4K TV, so I didn't watch it in 4K.
It's true.
But,
it's true.
I did get to watch it on Vudu in HD, and so I could see some of that. And it is really impressive, the difference that you can see side by side. And and obviously, like in general, you can tell when it was filmed because of that kind of sheen it has on the shots. But you can't tell as much, obviously, with the new version. So I was also impressed, even just with the HD version.
Yeah, no, the HD version that would be shown now too comes from what they did with the restoration. So you're absolutely right. Like I think it's great because it just holds up for years to come. And, it was just so neat. There's a quick documentary on the 4K disc. It might even be somewhere probably on YouTube you could find, but you could see all the painstaking work that they did put into this, to clean up the original negative in the first place, to erase scratches where needed, to help with some color correction and things like that, to make the movie as consistent, as beautiful as possible. And the fact that Spielberg is so happy with it, just lets you know just how good of a job they did. So, it's just something that I think, when we're looking at these older films and they have done such work, I think it's definitely worth praising them, and especially if it's been done as well as this has been. So, well, Christy, I wanted to ask you just before we got to the ratings for this. This movie continues to have an incredible legacy, and it continues to be a movie that people watch and that people like. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts of why do you think Jaws continues to endure now, and people seem to still be responding to it?
Well, I will definitely say that it has the benefit of being something that's timeless, in as far as it could happen at any point in history and it's still relevant. Even though it was kind of obvious what year it was filmed in. I mean, like shark attacks are still a thing. So I like that piece of it, and I think that's definitely something that keeps people coming back to it. And it also capitalizes on a common fear. Like we were saying, it's not just the fear of, possibly sharks, but just the fear of the unknown. And that I would argue that most people, especially if they're swimming in the ocean for the first time, there is that fear of like, what is underneath me right now? I don't really know.
Yep. 100%.
And it's such a massive expanse of all of that as well. And you're just going, well, let's hope for the best. And people do it all the time. So I think it's got those things. And then this movie, obviously, throughout all of the points that we made, it's the perfect storm of things that came together in the best way.
Yeah.
It had to have the best cast and the best music in spite of its budget and its rinky-dinky shark.
Yeah. No, I agree with I think that this movie continues to hold up and continues to have the legacy it does, where people want to continue to watch it, and people continue to respond to it because it's a human story, not a shark story. And I think, like you said, there's a timelessness to it, to which the experiences that these people are going through are the same experiences that we kind of have today, in the sense of, we talked about the idea of facing what's happening and hunting it down, and doing the right thing regardless of the cost. All of these type of things are things to which this movie speaks to. And it's a very human story. It's a very important story. And I really appreciate that about this film. And I think that's why it stands the test of time, because there is just something that is intrinsically accessible about this movie, because it's not about, just chasing a shark. And I think that's really, really impressive, that Spielberg understood that this is more about the way the situation is impacting the people than it is about anything else. And so I love it for that. And so I'm really interested, because I feel like we've probably had nothing but effusive praise for this film so far. What would you rate Jaws?
So for some reason in the past, I had said it was a 4 out of 5. I don't know why. Because the more that I have watched it and seen the behind the scenes things and obviously have the massive respect that I do for Spielberg and for John Williams, this is a perfect movie because it also, although it's not a big budget movie, it also really was that time when magic was happening, in a sense of, you know, it took all of these things coming together in the right way for it to be what it is now and to last. And like we were talking about with the problem solving about not having the greatest animatronic shark to use, it just was a different time as well for movie making, where I feel like it was forced creativity that ended up being better for it, the same way that things happened with the first Star Wars movie for Lucas. And that's why this works so well and why I have so much respect for them and for this movie. So, of course, I give it a 5 out of 5.
You know, I think this movie is, to me, I believe when I looked back at my Letterboxd rating, I think it was a 4 out of 5, and then I rewatched it and I was like, no, this is just a 5.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an almost perfect film, you know, and part of that is the way in which they overcome some difficulties to create a movie that is probably better than if they had the ability to just, you know, do whatever they wanted to do.
Right.
And so right there with you. I believe this to be one of the best movies out there. And, you know, it's to me, it's understandable why this movie became the first blockbuster. You know, it gave you spectacle in a way that movies before that just hadn't. And it just puts you in the middle of something crazy and with adventure ridden, and it was just fantastic. So I 100% agree with you. This is a 5 out of 5 stars. So well, Christy, before we get out of the 400th episode, if people, you know, wanted to catch up with you, see what else you've got going on, just talk to you in general, where could they find you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BespinBell. And when I'm not here, you know, I also did a podcast that is a closed show called Sabers and Spells over on the Skywalking Through Neverland network. And you can find me on Facebook in the Babel Conference as well. So I hope you will check us out on there. Where can they find you?
Well, you could find me all over the place under the name MattRushing02. That's Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero. I'm on all of those platforms. You can also find me here on the TFM network doing a bunch of different shows outside the 602 Club. Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek. We've also got The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise, Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and The Artificial Tango about Star Trek Picard. I'm over on the Nerd Party Network doing a couple of different shows. One's completed. I did that with Dre Kaufman. It's called Owl Post. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then John Mills and I do Aggressive Negotiations, which is an absolute blast. It is a Star Wars podcast. And so, you know, before we get out of here for the 400th episode, I'd like to say we would love to hear from you. 400 episodes and more to come. We'd just love to talk to you. So again, hit us up on social media at the 602 Club on Twitter or on Instagram at 602 Club TFM. Please let us know what have been your favorite shows. Let us know you actually listen to the show all the way by letting us know that on Twitter. That's a call out for you. If you're listening right now, please hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what have been your favorite episodes. But as always, thank you so much for joining us.
And that's some bad hat, Harry.